So hello students, today we'll start our unit number 2, which is construction project planning and stages of project planning. So the first topic number 1 is pre-tender planning, pre-construction planning and its planning stages. So firstly, what is pre-tender planning? So what is pre-tender planning? It is defined as contractors' planning considerations during the preparation of an estimate and its conversion into a commercial bid. So pre-tender program produced by contractors is used to aid tendering process and assist the estimator to put in the desired price. So the elements of pre-tender planning are site visit, deduction of current rate, work method statement, time planning, and deciding on the financial resources available. Next,
What is
need
commercial
for
bid?
pre-tender planning. So there are basically 5 points. The first one is to establish a realistic contract period on which the tender may be based. Second one is to identify the construction methods. Third one is to assess the method related items which affect the bid prices. Fourth one is to aid the build-up of contract preliminaries and plan the expenditure required. And the last one is to aid the tendering process. Next, what is pre-construction planning? The planning period of construction is known as pre-construction planning, and it sounds planning will be imperative to the success of the finished project. So there are many pre-construction planning stages that a contractor will need to work through in order to ensure that the project goes on very smoothly till the end of the project, from the start of the project till the end of the project. So the planning stages of pre-construction, the first one is initial meeting between the client and the contractor. So it all starts with an initial meeting. The contractor will meet face to face with the owner or the client to go over their goals for the construction project. An initial budget will likely be discussed as well when the client hopes that the job will be completed. So the initial meeting is more about learning the client's vision for the project than discussing any hard details. So the contractor will then take all of the information he or she gathers at this meeting and starts to put together the rest of the pre-construction plan. The contractor and client will stay closely tied at the hip during the entire construction planning process and have many follow-up meetings to stay updated and also to make the required changes if needed. Next one, define the objectives of the project. So during the initial stage of pre-construction planning, you will outline the overall project. So this will include looking over blueprints and architectural designs, as well as the big picture goals of the client. The client should submit any questions they have to the contractor during this time, which may include any issues with the planning, placement or design which the client thinks may become a problem during the construction. So this evaluation will lay the groundwork for the rest of the pre-construction planning process. So knowledgeable contractors will have all the answers the client needs, and it should be able to determine if the client's vision is feasible for construction in the intended or desired location. So from here on, the contractor will move on to the main three objectives of the pre-construction planning process. First, the scope of work. Second, setting a budget. Third one, creating a schedule or a program. The scope, schedule and budget. So a detailed project scope. So in order for better envision of the client's objectives and also to get on the same page for the big picture of the project, the greater scope will need to be understood. The scope of a construction project is basically a description of the work that will be performed during the construction process. So the contractor will need to outline the scope from start to the finish and determine what types of workers are needed for each phase of construction, as well as what equipment and materials will be required to complete the job. So combining all of these elements, it will form the overall scope of the project. So this is perhaps the single most important part of the pre-construction planning process, as it will act as a roadmap for the entire job. So the scope will go from a broad outline to a step-by-step definition of each item that needs to be checked to reach the project goal. It should be clearly described for the client to understand and will need to be agreed upon by all the stakeholders involved in this entire process. Next, setting a budget, which is very important in any construction project. Setting a budget. So every construction project will begin with an initial budget or a price that the client had in mind to spend on a given project. However, this number is typically uninformed and with no consideration given to how much a construction project costs. Often, this is simply the initial number that the client has to spend on the project. The contractor can attempt to see if the project is feasible within this budget or make suggestions to either change the project within those confines or stretch the budget to accommodate the client's goals. The budget is a very vital component of realizing the actual project scope, and it will help to determine what materials are needed, what subcontractors will need to be hired, as well as the site for construction. So the early budget estimates will be rather fluid as contractor and client work together to reach an agreement on price and goals for the construction. So the budget should not be aspirational, rather based on previous experience with similar jobs as well as in-depth knowledge of what certain materials and components will cost. So during this budget setting period, the contractor will look into potential issues that may arise and come up with contingencies in the budget to cover them up. So they will also search for opportunities to save money in every part of the job. The contractor will create this budget and evaluate savings and opportunities using the two tools of the trade, which is cost estimating and value engineering or value optimization. Next, cost estimating. So early cost estimates are important to create an accurate budget for the project. So realistic budgeting based on facts instead of feelings will accurately document these cost estimates, which can help the client maximize their budget. So this cost estimate will be provided up front during the pre-construction planning stage, as well as during the design development and the construction document stages should there be any changes. So however, the initial budget should have been built in contingencies to prepare for any of those changes that do happen to occur. Next, value optimization. So during this stage of pre-construction, the contractor will look to not only cut costs but also improve the overall value of the project. They will need an understanding of what the client considers valuable to reach these conclusions, as well as have a firm grasp on value engineering. This value optimization is most effective early in the planning of a construction project, when the team can look into the scope of the project and find opportunities for both cost savings and value improvement, whether that be via life cycle cost analysis or using more sustainable materials and efficient LED components, etc. So, a common unfortunate pitfall for construction projects is to go over the budget. But careful evaluation during the pre-construction planning process can help to avoid this problem. So the team should be continuing to review the estimates and make adjustments throughout the project so that everyone is aware of the changes in the budget. So with a sound plan in place, none of these changes will put costs far beyond the original or estimated budget. Next, setting a schedule. The schedule of a construction project will be another vital component of the pre-construction planning stages. High on the pre-construction checklist will be the due date for when the project needs to be done. Perhaps the client has a hard end date that they absolutely need the job done, while others may be more flexible. Knowing ahead of time can make all the difference, and staying on task with a clearly outlined schedule will ensure all contractors and subcontractors are held accountable for their portion of the job. To keep things moving towards the goal, an initial schedule will be created. So key milestones will be outlined in this schedule, and the team will form start and finish dates for each different portion of the project to see that if it is finished in its entirety by the given date. So with so many moving parts, it is a big help to have everyone working together along the same timeline. So from this early baseline, subcontractor input will be given to see what is feasible and tweaks will be made to the initial schedule. So everyone involved in the project will need to add their input to avoid falling behind schedule. The task, milestone and completion dates will need to be agreed upon, and all responsibilities will need to be clearly defined. It's often a good idea to build check-in dates into the schedule to keep the client updated on progress and adjust any scheduling issues. Staying ahead of problems in the timeline allows for things to move around more easily. The scope, budget, and schedule are the main three elements of pre-construction planning that will drive a construction project. At times, one component may cause certain decisions to be made more than another, but overall, they should all be developed in unison to have a more cohesive project. The construction team will encounter scenarios that may challenge the budget or timeline during construction, but contingencies will be in place to handle them. This pre-construction phase enables wiggle room for things to happen, and it is likely that something will, but good preparation means that it likely won't set the project back too far. So by anticipating problems, the scope, budget, and schedule will likely stay close to its original plan throughout the project. They will be sufficiently detailed and correspond with each other to make the project move smoothly. An item in the schedule will have a corresponding budget value that will be factored into the overall scope. There are other key items that fall under this trio of pre-construction planning stages that will require special attention from the construction team. First one, the initial schematic design. Sometimes created during the initial evaluation, the schematic design will serve as the first visual to the client and will be what the rest of the project is drawn from. The client will offer feedback and other circumstances will force changes to be made, but it is likely that this initial schematic will help to form the final product. Number 2, analysis of the construction site. Construction can't move forward if the site is found to be unsuitable for the client's goal. The contractor will visit the site to look into its feasibility and see whether or not the work required can be done on the site or not. So this will include an evaluation of the site's soil to ensure it can provide a solid foundation, as well as keeping in mind things like traffic flow, parking, landscaping, capacity, and more. The contractor will take this information back to the client to offer suggestions on how to make the site work, otherwise a new site will have to be found. 3. Procurement management. An often overlooked part of pre-construction is long lead times. This refers to when a material may take a long time to occur. Careful pre-planning will build this lead time into the schedule so that no time is lost waiting for it to arrive. So other aspects of the job can continue while the material is on its way, and senseless delays can be easily avoided. Next, acquiring the proper approvals. Naturally, every construction job requires the proper approvals and building permits before it can be moved forward. So these are items that should be acquired by the contractor during the pre-construction phases to ensure that construction can move forward. Once this phase is completed, your project will move to the building stage and eventually post-construction. So that's all for this lecture. You can give your name and enrollment ID in the chat box. Also, we'll see lecture videos on this related topics from IIT.
Namaskar. Welcome once again to this lecture in the series on Principles of Construction Management. And today, we'll basically talk about planning and scheduling in construction activities, So now planning is the process of drawing up a scheme of action or execution in advance, foreseeing the likely future developments. In construction industry or in planning for a construction project, it could involve choice of technology. It could involve defining the work tasks. That is, we break up the project into individual jobs or works. So as part of the planning exercise, we try to break the project down into different jobs or different tasks. Then there is this aspect of estimation of required resources. We break a job down to different activities, different tasks, and then try to find out for each task or job, what are the resources required in terms of manpower, equipment, consumables, and so on. The estimation of duration is a very, very critical part of our planning exercise. We must know whether a project is going to be completed in 10 months or 20 months or 2 months. So in order to be able to do that effectively, accurately, we have to have an idea of the resources that are required and whether or not by just increasing the number of resources or just increasing the resources that we allocate to a particular activity, can we keep reducing the time? It may not be possible sometimes to reduce the time beyond a certain point. Identification of interaction among different tasks. This is a very critical part of our understanding when we try to understand or when we try to analyze whether we can take up one task without completing some others. Which tasks in a particular project can be independently taken up? If one process requires another process to be completed, for example, in the kind of boundary wall example that we talked about, we cannot fabricate the angle unless the angle has been procured. We cannot fabricate the reinforcing bars for the footing or the columns unless they have been procured. But once they have been procured, we can go ahead and fabricate the reinforcement cage for the footings or for the columns. So basically, identification of interaction, determining the interdependencies is a very, very important part of project planning. Now, every stakeholder in a project carries out their own planning exercise, and it is important to ensure coordination. So we know that, we've talked about it at the outset of our discussion in this course, a project has different stakeholders. There's the client, there's a contractor, there's the designer, there's possibly a person who's financing the project. So all these people, they look at the project from different points of view and carry out their own plans. So now their plans can be looked upon as focusing on the quality sometimes safety, sometimes manpower, sometimes equipment, sometimes time itself, and so on. So now looking at the emphasis in construction planning is either schedule-oriented or cost-oriented. In the schedule-oriented side, we have time and resource orientation, and in the cost-oriented construction planning, we are most of the time talking about direct and indirect costs associated. Now, we talked about the different types of plans. It could be the time plan. So basically what we are talking about here is the schedule. How much time it is going to take to complete an activity. If we are slipping, then what should be done to cover the time and so on. Then there is the cost plan. How much is the project going to cost? What is the kind of cash flow that we need? If we want to accelerate the project, try to complete the project earlier, what is the kind of cost that we need to incur or additional cost that we need to incur and so on. Then there is the quality plan. A project has different activities. If you consider a tunneling project, there is a boring of the tunnel that has to be done. There is a stabilization of the soil that has to be done. Independently, we are making segments which have to be then brought and assembled at site. So now each of these activities has to have a quality plan. We should know what are the parameters to control as far as quality is concerned for each of these activities and have a plan so that the people who are executing those activities are aware of what are the quality control measures to